Since the turn of this century, Fulham supporters have had to watch with envy as their West London rivals Chelsea have gone on to rack up plenty of silverware. But the oldest professional football club in London has never won a major trophy itself. That shouldn't be confused with no achievements in the bag whatsoever, because they do have a few trophies from more than a century ago. But those outdated achievements don't hold too much weight nowadays, and so the club has struggled to provide its supporters with any major reason to celebrate it in the modern era. Chelsea's recent successes this century are just more salt in the wounds. But less than 2 decades ago, the club went on a European campaign that their supporters will remember for a long time to come. Fans who got to follow Fulham's journey that season lived through a classic European dream. After barely surviving relegation the season before, they managed a 7th place finish in the Premier League. Fulham had a phenomenal league campaign, creating major upsets and making Craven Cottage a dreaded place to visit in the league. The 7th place finish also meant a spot in the Europa League qualifying playoffs for next season. That's when their European campaign superseded the 7th place finish. It was a fairy tale that everyone kept doubting at every step of the way, but Fulham kept pushing on. With players like Zamora, Guerra, Duff and Dempsey, there was no shortage of moments of pure genius and absolute bangers. The most memorable goal of the campaign was when Dempsey chipped the Juventus goalkeeper Antonio Cimenti from outside the box and Craven Cottage went wild. That chip also sealed the London club's unexpected victory over the Italian giants. They went on to reach the Europa League final in only their 2nd ever season playing in a European competition. This unprecedented feat was even more impressive when you consider that they almost went down to the Championship just a couple of years prior. So what happened? How did this relegation-threatened side go on to play in the Europa League final? This is the crazy story of Fulham's greatest season ever. It all started in 2007 when Roy Hodgson was called to steady the ship which had almost sunk the season prior. The younger generation probably only remembers Roy Hodgson as the manager of Crystal Palace and possibly his short stint with England over the past decade. But the Palace Academy graduate from the 60s has managed a long list of clubs spanning over 8 countries including Inter Milan and Liverpool. Before the Crystal Palace days, his longest managerial reign was for Fulham from December 2007 to June 2010. Under Lawrie Sanchez, Fulham had barely avoided relegation in the 2006-07 season and placed 16th in the table. The next season didn't start all that great, and by December, they were floating around the relegation zone once again. Roy Hodgson was chosen as the successor to Sanchez and came in 3 days before the year 2008 started. It was a nervous second half of the season as the club never really pulled out of that relegation threat. In their last 5 Premier League matches, Fulham won 4 of them. This included wins over Reading and Birmingham City, both of which would be placed 18th and 19th respectively by the final match day. Another crucial win came over Manchester City away from home. The London club was down by 2 in the first half and turned it around in the second by scoring 3, the last of which came in the 2nd minute of stoppage time. The resilient form at the very end of the season proved to be just enough for them to hang on to the Premier League for another campaign. But it was very clear that some solid reinforcements were required if they were to move up the table. The 2008-09 season started with centre forwards Andy Johnson and Bobby Zamora joining from Everton and West Ham respectively. Johnson was an expensive capture as the 27-year-old arrived for €13.3 million and big expectations. But most of the other incoming players were a clever piece of business from Hodgson. Zoltan Guerra from West Brom and veteran goalkeeper Mark Schwarzer from Middlesbrough came on free transfers to further strengthen the squad. An 18-year-old Chris Smalling was also captured for free and would be sold to Manchester United 2 years later for €8 million. This variant of young to experienced players was added to a squad that already had the likes of a few underrated talents like Clint Dempsey and Britta Hengeland. Even before the season had started, a keen-eyed watcher could tell that Fulham were meant for greater things than just avoiding relegation like they had the past couple seasons. But even the most astute analyst couldn't have predicted what would come next. The season started with a bang as they won against Arsenal in just the 2nd match of their season. But the first 6 matches came with 4 losses and 2 wins. Every single match was won or lost by a single goal margin, which spoke to just how close the games were. Then over the next 13 league games, Fulham lost only once. That single loss came at Goodison Park. This crazy run of form included wins over Tottenham and Newcastle at Craven Cottage, along with draws against Manchester City, Chelsea, Liverpool and Villa. From the middle of October to the end of the year, Fulham only lost one game and were in 9th place. It was a resilient defence, along with the atmosphere at Craven Cottage, that made it so hard to score past them. It wasn't just down to a superb defence and Hangeland playing as the destroyer. It was also down to Hodgson instilling his players what you might call today Dyche mentality, to never say die in the defensive phase of the game. The season ended in 7th place, a drastic difference to the side that almost went down to the Championship the season prior. Fulham had now qualified for the Europa League 3rd qualifying round for next season. The Cottagers were buzzing about going on at least one European outing before they might get eliminated. It was also an important decision for Hodgson and the club to make whether to prioritise or compromise on the pre-season European draws. For a mid-table club like Fulham, domestic cup competitions and a higher finish in the league were usually priorities because continental football was seen as a hindrance to the season. The 3rd qualifying round was against Lithuanian side Vetra, which Fulham overcame easily with 2 3-0 wins. The playoff round against Russian side Amkar Perm was a bit closer, but ended with Fulham advancing 3-2 on aggregate. After these 2 wins, the club and their squad realised this wasn't just their journey. The fans deserved to see them give it their all too. Fulham had qualified for the group stages, which meant at least 3 more visits abroad for the Cottagers. But surely that would be it, right? With Roma, FC Basel and CSKA Sofia in their group, it wasn't going to be an easy task to make the top 2. Roma and Basel were particularly troublesome. A double over Basel, 4 points against Sofia and a draw against Roma saw them advance in 2nd place in the group. It went down to the very last match day of the group stage against Basel, but strikes from Zamora and Gira made sure they went through to the next stage. It was Shakhtar Donetsk up next in the round of 32, the defending champions of the Europa League. It was a long time ago, so it's probably worth reminding you that Shakhtar was one of the most exciting teams in Europe at the time, with a core of Brazilian talents like Fernandinho, Costa, Willian and Luis Adriano, who would eventually go on to become world-class players in their prime. Many Fulham players who witnessed that campaign will tell you that it was the hardest team they faced in Europe. But resilience was the theme for Fulham that season, and resilient they were against the Ukrainian side over 2 legs. Zamora came in clutch to bag a 2-1 win at home. It was followed by a 1-1 draw in Ukraine to book their place in the round of 16. The draw against Italian giants Juventus did not upset a single Cottager because they had lived the stuff of dreams. To go out against the old lady would be a graceful exit. This feeling in football is hard to describe to someone who doesn't watch the beautiful game. To be happy and fearless in the face of what everyone believed would be an end to the campaign. The first leg in Turin ended in a 3-1 defeat. It was expected, and the single away goal was a great prize, a consolation to hold on to before the home leg. The return leg seemed like a formality for Juventus to get it over with, and a goal by Trezeguet 2 minutes in all but confirmed that. What no one expected after that goal was how loud and relentless the home support would continue to be. Craven Cottage sang and danced like the goal meant nothing, and it was their last European night, so they may as well bask in the moment. This support gave the team their 12th man, as they like to say. They required 3 goals in the remaining 80 or so to take it to extra time. Zamora was a joy to watch as he danced around the experienced Juve defenders, which included World Cup winner Cannavaro at centre-back. In the 9th minute, Zamora controlled a cross from Konchesky with his chest in the middle of the box and gave Fulham the first goal of the night. In the 27th minute, the World Cup winning centre-back committed a last-man challenge and was promptly sent off. This gave the London club a wave of hope. They could change the game now. Gira made it 2-1 before half-time, and suddenly it was on. The noise inside Craven Cottage made it seem like 12 players were playing against 10. The second half started, and within 3 minutes, Fulham had a penalty. Gira stepped up to score his 2nd goal of the night and made it 4-4 on aggregate. The game was going to extra time if it stayed the same. But it wouldn't stay the same, and the best goal of the night came just 7 minutes before the 90th minute mark. Dempsey had come on just 10 minutes ago, and it would prove to be a masterclass substitution from Hodgson. He received the ball outside the box, and in a moment of only Dempsey could do that. He chipped the ball and placed it perfectly in the top left corner. It was a moment that no Cottager who was there that night could ever forget. The stadium erupted into a wild frenzy as they realised they were going to the quarter-finals of the Europa League. That night was without a doubt the pinnacle for every Fulham fan. The reigning Bundesliga champions of Wolfsburg were up next. They were beaten home and away by Fulham to advance and win 3-1 on aggregate. Another Bundesliga team in the semi-final waited for them, and the European dream refused to end. The first leg against Hamburg ended in a goalless draw in Germany. At Craven Cottage, Hamburg struck first through a direct free kick in the first half. But Fulham had another comeback up their sleeves as they scored twice within 6 minutes in the second half to sink their opponents. The Cottagers were in the final of a major European tournament. This wasn't a dream anymore, they had actually done it. They faced Atletico Madrid in the final and found themselves behind after Fulham opened the scoring. But within 5 minutes, Davis replied with an equaliser and the game went into extra time. Zamora had been nursing an injury since the semis and had to be taken off just 55 minutes into the final. Extra time was about to come to an end and everyone was thinking about penalties. But just 4 minutes before that could happen, Forlan's shot was deflected into the goal as Schwarzer helplessly watched it go past him. The perfect final moment was left to the imaginations of 1,000 Cottagers. Roy Hodgson deserved his flowers for taking his side to the final with shrewd man management and unorthodox ways of motivating his players. Even though a dagger in the final minutes stopped Fulham from winning their first major trophy in such spectacular fashion, as the dust settled, everyone realised what a special journey it had been, regardless of the ending. Hodgson left for Liverpool that summer, and even though Fulham would play in the Europa League again in 2011-12, it ended in elimination from the group stage. The great set of players slowly broke away from the squad, and eventually Fulham were relegated in 2014. They came up and went back down a couple more times since then, eventually returning for good in 2022. Marco Silva has been doing good work with them since then, and their performances this season speak for themselves. They sit in the top half of the table, and while it's too early to say, you can't rule out Fulham to maybe end up in the European spot. Can you think of a better underdog campaign that fell through at the final step? Let us know below.